welcome. You're watching The Full View here on SABC News Channel. Thank you so much for joining us this Thursday, an important one as we expect the State of the Nation address in just about an hour's time. It's a first, really. It'll be the first hybrid State of the Nation address, and a very smaller affair it is. Welcome to it. I'm Sipiso Makweta. And talking about smaller affair, Francis, it's going to be a cheaper one from the perspective that Parliament will be spending far less. It says about 2.2 million, but I think also cheaper for those who probably be splurging, especially on the red carpet. We know that people will fly as far as Italy, so cheaper all round, but sadly lots of jobs as well at that.
Yeah, you're right. There's a little economy around the State of the Nation address. I mean, we see that incredible fashion, that razzle-dazzle. The military gets to parade their best. We see flybys, so that's also, of course, an economic cost, but experience for those involved, and that's not happening this year. A very muted State of the Nation address perhaps befitting after the economic ravages of 2020. So remember, around this time last year, President Cyril Ramaphosa was upbeat, talking about fixing the fundamentals of the economy. That was when he laid out the plan for 2020, saying that it was time to get things right, and talking about an inclusive economy, sort of setting things right given what was needed in terms of redress about the past. A month later, COVID-19 hit, and it was just economic turmoil. Basically, South Africa came to a halt. 2.2 million people lost their jobs, and incredible economic numbers. It looks like the economy could contract for 2020. Remember, we're waiting for the number for last year by close to 8%, and that's just incredible, and much worse than some of the other countries that were also affected around the world. Well, President Cyril Ramaphosa is set to deliver his fifth State of the Nation address tonight. We'll see what he comes up with in this context. He is expected to tackle some of the key issues facing the country. Those include plans for the rollout of the vaccine to combat COVID-19 and to combat the pandemic, the ailing economy, job creation, industrial support, also expected to feature prominently in the speech. People will be looking out for any signs of what can be done about Eskom as well. Ramaphosa will also touch on plans to reignite the economy, load shedding likely to receive attention, gender-based violence, femicide also expected to take centre stage. Well, SABC News reporter Bulelani Philip is outside Parliament. Let's see if he can join us now. And Bulelani, I saw a few people mingling around, decidedly underdressed compared to last year. I guess it's mostly journalists outside.
Well, good evening to you, Francis, and to the viewers. Well, it's a different affair this year, given that the ceremony of 2021 State of the Nation address has been drastically reduced down. As you've said, here in the precinct of Parliament at the moment, there's probably more journalists and cameramen that are here than the members of Parliament, which shows you that this time of this year is going to be different. And of course, some members of Parliament who will be part of the 50 people that will be in the National Assembly have just walked in here into the National Assembly, where they expected to be seated by 6 o'clock, which is about a couple of minutes ago. So proceedings at the moment are ongoing, and we expect that the motorcade of the president is supposed to be coming in here from this direction at around 6:30, which is when things are going to be getting into the thick of things. Francis?
And Bulelani, apparently a remembrance for those who have lost their lives to COVID-19. So a somber beginning to the State of the Nation address.
Well, that's exactly what's going to be different this year. That ceremony, before the procession goes into the National Assembly, the President, accompanied by the Speaker of the National Assembly, Ms. Thandi Modise, as well as the Chairperson of the National Council of Provinces, Mr. Amos Masondo, will be lighting up candles in front of the House, where they will be remembering all those people who have passed away as a result of this pandemic, as well as those survivors who've made it through. Of course, the issue of COVID-19 is going to take center stage amongst other things, and it's for him a moment to actually remember all those people who've passed away, but also today it's a moment for him to give the country a plan of how they will combat this pandemic, but at the same time in terms of how they will clear the confusion around the implementation of this rollout plan of the vaccines. So today, one of the issues that we can expect for the president to dwell on quite extensively is the issue of the COVID-19 vaccine, as well as fighting this pandemic. Francis?
Well, Leilani, final question for you. I mean, we've seen, it's not a tradition, but it's happened at least a couple of times that the EFF disrupts the State of the Nation address. They're not even going to be there today. Just tell us about the political parties and what they've decided on in terms of attendance today.
I think it's important just to take it a few days back when we're trying to solicit comments from the EFF that they've gone to ground, have not actually given the media the space to actually get a sense from them what do they expect from this 2021 SONA. And of course today one of the clearest indications about their feeling with the State of the Nation is that they won't be present in the House. We're told that they will be present virtually, but we've yet to see that. But of course the other party that will not be present in the House is the UDM. So we don't know maybe the reasons behind their stance of them not having a representative at least inside the House, but choosing to go virtually, what it's based on. But we do know the EFF has made it clear that they are opposed to the leadership style of the president, and they've accused him of also harboring a stance which is more favoring business, in particular white business, than ensuring that he transforms the economy. So we'll have to wait and see how, and perhaps maybe they respond post this State of the Nation in terms of how they feel about tonight's State of the Nation address. Francis?
All right, thank you very much. Bulelani Philip, live for us outside Parliament. A very muted affair this time. So Tsepiso, I mean, a lack of fashion drama, a lack of praise singers, just the usual fanfare, and maybe the political drama as well.
But that's also quite interesting, Francis, because just looking and reflecting back on COVID-19, you remember at about March this year, a couple of weeks in, we had opposition parties really rallying around government and the difficult situation that they found themselves in. But it seems now that the one thing that seems to at least unite them is the thing around COVID-19 and corruption. And that has also been echoed in some of the criticisms and the calls on the president to really take a firm stand, not only on this, but be hoping that his strategic plans will be indicative of taking this seriously. Well, let's just find out what's happening, at least in the public gallery, court of public opinion. Samkele Maseko, SABC News reporter, joins us now, also from Parliament. Booze and beaches, border posts, these are some of the criticisms, say, have turned public opinion away from the president, Samkele. What are your thoughts on this? Is it going to be difficult for him to reel people in and support him in whatever it is that he presents?
Well, at this point in time, the political spectrum on the issue of the response of government on this COVID-19 pandemic has been fraught with divisions. At this point in time, you remember that the economic freedom fighters have criticized President Ramaphosa from closing the SADC borders in the country, particularly when you look at how there was a humanitarian crisis that was building up at the Braid Bridge border post. You look at how they have said that they're essentially closing down the borders for neighboring countries to come into the country, and the EFF going as far as to saying that the coronavirus never entered the country through the land post, but it entered through the country, through the airplane, through Tambo International Airport, and that the President of the Republic of South Africa is essentially closing the door on African countries and the African diaspora. So it essentially has divided the political spectrum. You'd remember that President Ramaphosa would call all political formations to a consultation period in either here in Cape Town or in Joburg at the Union buildings to consult them on government's plan of fighting this particular pandemic that has ceased to exist. The IFP's the spokesperson Mkhuleko Hlengwa was complaining this morning that the president no longer does that, and that has essentially hampered government's response, and that it's not a response that all political formations can be united around, and saying that there is some sort of secrecy that has now creeped in government, and they also want to make sure that the procurement process for the vaccine is made public, and that the education process, South Africans can see it for themselves, and that SCOPA also has access to this particular process of procuring the vaccine in the country. As we've seen, that was a fraud. The first scandal that hit of COVID-19 was when the procurement of personal protective equipment was fraught by allegations of corruption, even hitting the highest office in the land in the form of the spokesperson of President Cyril Ramaphosa, Khusela Diko.
Right. Now, in light of that, Samkele, I'd imagine that there is a sense of inertia around what the president can not only honestly promise, because some have said we've been having a family meeting so regularly that what new can he say, but we also had the finance minister not so long ago say you can't have everything all at once. Do you think that this is pretty much the tone that we're going to get from the president, saying that I'm doing the best that I can, but I can't be all things to all people?
What essentially we're going to get, you'll have to just excuse me, I'm trying to look on my left, there seems to be some sort of activity, but what we are essentially going to get from President Ramaphosa is a speech that will seemingly, there is some sort of activity on the shot that you are seeing now from my colleague Lucky. You can see some members of the South African Armed Forces making their way here to the precinct. Now you'd understand that the number of people assisting with the State of the Nation address has significantly been reduced by government due to stay in line with COVID-19 regulations. We do know that the 21-gun salute will not take place this year due to this particular pandemic, and once the president arrives, he will be going over to his office, and he'll go through the back to Parliament in order to be able to address the nation. Before that, there will be a candle lighting ceremony. But when it comes to the nitty-gritties of the substance of the content that we'll be receiving this evening from President Ramaphosa, it will be twofold: coronavirus procurement for the vaccine, and in economic aspect, because it has to be a balancing act of how you save lives and how you also strengthen the South African economy in order to stimulate it to create jobs. We can expect the president to speak extensively on the issues surrounding power utility Eskom. You remember Eskom was rolling out stage 3 load shedding yesterday, which negatively affects the South African economy. At some point, the president dubbed Eskom as single-handedly the biggest threat to the South African economy, particularly when Eskom was at stage 6, an unprecedented stage 6 of load shedding. So these are some of the issues that the president will speak over, and also the district modeling of rolling out infrastructure development or development within communities. Those are some of the issues that the president has been fighting off late. I'm just going to bring in Natasha Mozoni from the Democratic Alliance, who's the chief whip for the official opposition party, and how they view and stand as the Democratic Alliance in what they expect from President Ramaphosa, particularly knowing that she sits in the Portfolio Committee of Public Enterprises as well. Ms. Mozoni, as the Democratic Alliance, what do you expect to hear from President Ramaphosa this evening?
Tonight, all we want to hear from President Ramaphosa is the plans that he has in place to get us all vaccinated and to get those vaccines to us in time before it's too late. We want to hear exactly how he's going to stimulate the economy to get small and medium enterprises back up and running. We want to hear how he's going to make sure that education crisis doesn't fall deeper into the crisis than it's in already. And we want to hear how job growth is actually going to physically be rolled out in a format to ensure that we don't have the unemployment rate hitting a 35 to 40% rate going forward.
Ms. Mozoni, I see you've got a campaign going on there with the mask that you are wearing, vaccines. Now, there's been blunders with the vaccine, particularly procuring vaccines that expire within a 2-month period when you receive them with a 3-month lifespan. As the Democratic Alliance, how do you view that particular saga playing out?
Well, I see it playing out as a bit of a horror movie because we also don't know the efficacy rate of this particular vaccine that we're getting. Now, the scary thing is that countries that are developing, third world countries around the world, in South America, in Asia, in the Middle East, they've started hitting the 50% vaccination mark, where 50% of their population has been vaccinated. We haven't vaccinated one person in our country yet. So it's incredibly concerning, and the President has to take responsibility for this massive blunder that A, has cost the country a fortune, and B, is going to cost us many, many lives.
Ms. Mazoni, you look at the issues of the procurement of the vaccine. You've got Sputnik 5 coming from Russia, you've got AstraZeneca, you've got Johnson & Johnson also coming into the country. Where should the focus be with government in procuring this particular vaccines, and which ones have a particular issue of being able to spot and to deal with the new variant in South Africa?
Well, I think it's, this variant is making it so difficult, and that's why we need to get people vaccinated now before this variant starts taking hold and it becomes the main COVID virus that we have in our country. So I think the trick to this is to make sure that you don't limit yourself to any one company. We should be looking towards the Sputnik, towards AstraZeneca. We should be looking towards Moderna, Pfizer. Anyone who can get us the vaccine. We need everyone to send us the vaccine, and we need as many as possible to come into our country as quickly as possible.
When you look at issues particularly surrounding state-owned enterprises, which is a portfolio committee you sit in, and the issue of Eskom rolling out stage 3 load shedding yesterday, do you have any confidence that particularly the single biggest threat to our economy, which is Eskom, can be able to get its ducks in a row and provide the much needed energy security to stimulate our economy?
Well, now that I'm Chief Whip, I've had to give up my portfolio of public enterprises, so Khaleb Kachali has taken over from me. But isn't it interesting that on the day of SONA, we hit stage 3 load shedding, experts telling us we could hit stage 6, even going up to a stage 8. Now, to power an economy, you need electricity. No foreign investment is going to come into our country if they don't have a secure energy supply. Some of the vaccines require refrigeration. So we can't have a situation where we get the vaccine in our country and the fridges don't work because of load shedding. Oxygen machines in hospitals require electricity. So it's not just the fact that you can't turn on the TV and watch Generations or the news. It's now becoming a life-saving commodity, energy. And I think that what we need to remember is it was Cyril Ramaphosa himself who told us that our energy woes would be a thing of the past and a distant memory and a bad memory. He told us that at the last SONA. Tonight we sit with stage 3 load shedding.
What is the Democratic Alliance's plans on the issues of rolling out the vaccine? If you were in government, how would you go about in rolling out this particular vaccines to South Africans, knowing that there is infrastructure problems, particularly in rural areas in the country?
Well, firstly, I would make sure that the National COVID Council was done away with, and that a body that would have accountability to Parliament and to the people of South Africa was in charge of the rollout of the vaccine. I would also make sure that the premiers were given a greater authority and a greater say in the way the vaccine is rolled out, because obviously each province has its own dynamics and its own different ways in which the vaccine would be easier to roll out. So what I would do is I would also call in the opposition parties. I would get everyone around the table, which we should have done from word go when the pandemic started, and we would look at it as a group of South Africans and not just as a political party rollout as we've seen now. So what we need to see is South Africans working together, working harder and smarter to make sure that the rollout of the vaccine isn't hindered like we've seen this particular vaccine that's coming now expiring in April. Had we had more eyes on the prize, certainly this would have been avoided.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mazoni. That is the Chief Whip of the Democratic Alliance. She had served in the Portfolio Committee of Public Enterprises, which has been taken over by Khaleb Kachali. That was my mistake there. But they seem to have a campaign going with the leader of the Democratic Alliance, John Steenhuisen, in black masks. And the issue of the mask says, vaccines now. As you can see, vaccines now. We do have AstraZeneca, which is expiring in 2 months. Johnson & Johnson is coming in about a week, in the words of the Minister of Health, Dr. Zwelini Mkhize. There's also the issue of Sputnik 5 from Russia, which has been raised by the SACP. Back to you in studio.
Samkela Masego speaking to Natasha Mazoni, which is only one of 50 members of Parliament who will be there for this reduced State of the Nation address, as we mentioned, a hybrid event this year. Francis?
Thanks, Apisa. As we were talking about earlier, I mean, the economic indicators heading into the State of the Nation address are just horrible given the ravages of COVID-19, and a lot of the plans of last year just dissipated as we went into that lockdown, that very hard lockdown in March last year. And of course, the economy is nowhere near recovering. We're now joined by Isabel Fry, Director at the Institute for Studies in Poverty and Inequality, looking at issues of poverty, inequality, how the poor have been very hard hit by this. And from an investor perspective, from Nkunzi Wealth, the Group CEO, Owen Nkomo, with us. Thank you both for being with us tonight. Isabel, if I may start with you, I mean, dealing with inequality in South Africa, something you care about deeply. Last year, the President was saying we can get some redress, we can work towards an inclusive economy. There was some excitement around that. Look at the structural things that keep the poor poor. Are all those plans basically, have they gone up in smoke?
Thanks, Francis, and good evening to you and to your viewers. It's a very comprehensive, complex question that you ask, because we know on the one hand that certain things have been done. We've seen the rollout of social relief of distress grants, which have really crossed that threshold of giving social security to working age people. But on the other hand, with the withdrawal of them, because those structural reforms have not been undertaken, we see that people are still dependent and waiting, and hence the poverty levels that people are in are even more dire right now. So, I mean, I think that what we didn't see last year was a real grappling with the extent of the problem. So we also have different narratives happening at the National Treasury. So, for instance, we get told when trying to motivate for the extension as social justice activists at NEDLAC for social grants, we get told there is no money, and yet we see a Business Insider article on the 8th of February saying that Treasury has the embarrassment of sitting on 378 billion additional rands than it really should, that it planned for. So the question is, what is the real economy? Because we know from our membership, we know from the research that my institute does, that for millions of people sitting across the country, that they know the real economy of their household. The real economy is that there is no food, there is very little hope. We know that the education system has been staggered, and we don't see the indicators that are going to people saying, we're going to take the wealth that exists in this country, we're going to make sure that everybody has access to some. So the question on vaccines is critically important, but you've also got to ask the back question, which is, once people have been vaccinated, how are people going to eat at that point in time?
Yeah, a good question indeed. If you could hear one thing tonight, very quickly, what would you like to hear from the President?
Definitely an expansion of the social relief of distress grants for 12 months so that people have some certainty, bringing women in, because women were generally ineligible for the social relief of distress grants. We also know that 350 rand is well below the food poverty line. So even that extension of assistance is not going to let people have enough food to eat to survive. But that is the way that you kickstart the economy. And if you look at the global findings, I was talking to a colleague who's working in the UK, and what they're finding is that those people who've listened to the seasoned kinds of responses, such as go in big, go in at a household level in terms of your stimulus and your response, that needs to happen. Francis, we can't hear austerity. If we have austerity, we're going to wither away and die. We need to make sure that people have enough to stimulate. We need that purchasing power in the hands of millions of people who haven't had it to date.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go to Owen Nkomo. You deal with a very different picture. In fact, many, Owen, would say that the markets are not reflective at all of the real economy. So we're talking about people struggling to eat, and the markets have been soaring. That's a question for a little bit later on. What do investors want to hear tonight?
Well, Francis, and thanks for having me. I think the most important thing, as I've said in the past, is that consistency of policy drives, consistency of the leadership in the country, in terms of the message they're driving is very important. We want to make sure that what has been said last year and the previous years by the leadership of the country, particularly President Ramaphosa, in this State of the Nation address in a difficult period, we want to find out if there's consistency in the previous message and the message is going to deliver now. Obviously, we've had to deal with the challenge of COVID, but before then, we had to deal with unemployment and a slow economy and things like that. We going through load shedding at the moment. I think we need to have honest questions, and we need to have honest responses from the president in terms of how he thinks that his government has done and what the challenges are currently. Because as we sit here as business and as people at home, all we want to do is to be able to make our plans and know that the government, whatever they're telling us, we can rely on that information in order for us to shape the future of our businesses and our individual selves, so that the country can move forward from a business perspective and an individual perspective. We want to know what it's going to do to fix these questions that are arising out of COVID. We want to know as well what it's going to do to try and fix the economy. How is it dealing with corruption? We also want to understand the extent of the implementation of the infrastructure projects that have been spoken about for many, many years. We know the government is trying to spend about 800 billion. How much has been spent? And in terms of recovering the economy, how much of the 200 billion rands has been spent to help small businesses, which ultimately employ the men in the street, Francis. So all of those things are extremely important in my view, and perhaps maybe for the president to lay down the groundwork for the budget speech coming up from Mr. Mboweni. But certainly I do, unfortunately for me, I think that there's been a failure to link these State of the Nation addresses to what has been addressed in the previous year. So that's what I would like us to get clarity from the president.
Okay, connect the dots. And Owen, I mean, sometimes investors and business people call for austerity. Isabel is saying that that'll be a death knell. No more austerity. Do you think that this year we can all agree that there must be some sort of spending? Like you say, there needs to be something to help small businesses. We need to assess the spending that's already happened. Will investors be happy even if that 350 Rand grant, which is a lifeline to some unemployed people, gets extended?
Francis, the guy who's earning 350 rands a month would rather be earning 3,500 to 6,000 rands a month. So how do we get that to happen? We need the government to make sure that infrastructure projects happen. We need to make sure the government creates an environment that allows entrepreneurs to get access to capital. This 200 billion rands I mentioned earlier, if it hasn't got to 50 billion rands by now, I'll be disappointed, because it just shows that there is less and less or fewer of the small businesses that are benefiting from the government support. You need to create an environment for entrepreneurs to succeed. You need to create an environment where we don't have to pay people 350 rands. We don't have to pay people grants, but people can have a higher chance of getting a job that can be that can pay them a little bit more, and they can be self-sustaining. And any failure to that, Francis, I can guarantee you that we are slowly moving towards a position where the government will not be able to shoulder its responsibility to these people that can actually survive on 350 rands a month. We need an economy that is creating jobs that will give people 3,500 to 30,000 rands plus, because the environment allows entrepreneurs to thrive.
Isabel, you can respond to that if you like. And also, I mean, both of you have mentioned corruption. That is something that takes money out of the hands of the poor. It's just resulted in shock horror over the last few months. How does the president show leadership around corruption tonight?
Thank you. I think that there are a few things that Owen and I would agree on. The point of corruption being one of those. But I do want to pick up on very briefly on one of the narratives that he was talking about. And that is, many people say we need to look to the future in order to fix problems, and so that people won't have to survive on grants. We completely agree with that. On the other hand, people live on a daily basis. What we're saying is that at least what we want to hear for the next 12 months, there is some kind of certainty. He was talking about certainty for investors, but certainty for millions of rights holders under the South African Constitution is what we want to see. The other point that I wanted to pick up in terms of where money goes, we know that there is additional wealth in this country. We know that it's sitting idle. So the point in terms of the kinds of tax policies that we are adopting, the kinds of monetary policy, there is certainly space to continue. And I think the most disappointing thing is that if you look at policies over the last 24 years, we've been bound by the same constraints, saying we don't want to shock the markets, the investors, we want to ensure that there's additional money, but it doesn't come through. It doesn't trickle down to people. We talk about jobs, we talk about needing to create jobs. I was on a webinar this afternoon looking at Africa until 2063. Very few other countries are saying we can't do anything until we create jobs. People are saying, what do we do in the here and now? In order to sustain micro entrepreneurs, people need to have buying power. If you look, for instance, at the question of where we go and how we link the formal and informal, those are the questions that we need to be asking. We need to be asking, how do we free data up so that micro entrepreneurs can talk to the question of purchasing and increasing their purchasing power? I think, Francis, what we need to do is look at the here and now, take stock of that. I mean, I discovered to my concern that while we have many policies on jobs, we don't have a single strategy. So we talk about the need to create things. We talk about major plans. When you look at these, what is our industrial policy? What are the jobs, the skills that are coming to that? There isn't that kind of linked up state. So I agree that we need to spend a lot of time looking at, in the post-COVID moment, how do we go forward? But our deepest appeal is right now, we need to give a promise to the ordinary people in South Africa, the 22 million who are working age adults, 22 million people who are not in the labor market. Those are the people who directly the president needs to speak to tonight.
All right, Isabel Fry from the Institute for Studies in Poverty and Inequality and Nkunzi Wealth Group CEO Owen Nkomo. Please stay with us. Thank you for being with us. We'll continue this discussion. Just a quick welcome tonight to our viewers from SABC2, a special broadcast in the run-up to the State of the Nation address. Owen, let's move to you. You talk about, I mean, you're both talking here about job creation. It's so urgently needed. And you talk about this enabling environment. The fact is, there are so many people unemployed. We need jobs now. What exactly should the president say tonight?
Yeah, look, I mean, you know, Francis, it's a difficult one. When I was young and I was growing up, I always wanted to be a president. But I think that having witnessed a few presidents in my lifetime, I think it's not an easy job to have. So what we essentially need, like I said, I mean, I want the president to say there is money to help entrepreneurs grow their businesses. And this money has been used, and this is how you can access it. I can promise you there's many people that are taking risks and saying, I'm leaving employment, I want to create jobs. But there is no support, there's no clear line of sight to say this is where you get the money. And the one thing that the president, in my view, as part of his legacy that he builds, is a requirement for any leader and any minister in the government to make sure that they report back to the citizenry. I got 100 billion. This is what I have done with it. But at this stage, Francis, we have not seen that happening. And I think that this is why things just continue to just get worse and worse. For example, the 200 billion rands that's been given to the corporate banks to invest is not reaching black business people. It is obviously being given to white established businesses on the same measurements that you would get as a black business person going to ask for money in the bank. That is fine. The risk metrics make sense, but in my view, how are you then going to increase the number of participants that are not historically advantaged if you're going to continue to use historic measures of assessing credit accessibility to people in business? The president needs to be very bold about that if he is to create more people who have not economically participated in the first economy. Yeah. And I think he needs to be brave, and he needs to take custody of that.
And is small business the right focus? Oh, and I mean, of course, we must support small businesses, but some experts are saying the huge companies are creating the jobs right now, even though the NDP and many other plans were speaking about small businesses. We need to keep those companies together, the big ones.
Yes, you have to find the right balance, Francis. But the big companies are the same companies that are actually firing people right now. They're retrenching en masse. So those people, in my view, if during the good times, we could make sure that the smaller companies can make the decisions that will help make sure the big companies are supported from a contracting perspective, I think you will be able to save some of those jobs that are being lost from the big companies. Francis, in my humble view, it's a simple question of numbers. If there is 30% of procurement from black companies by the big entities, can the government finance that 30% so that black people don't struggle to take a piece of the pie that will make sure that they can sustain the companies that they're starting? At this stage, I promise you, we're on autopilot. And as black business, we don't know where to go to get the financial support we need to participate, to take advantage of the 30% allocation that we have according to the constitution of the country.
All right, unfortunately, we have to wrap it there. I was hoping to throw more questions at both of you. Thank you for being with us tonight. Talking about the dire situation ahead of the State of the Nation address in terms of the economy, many pushing for an extension of that 350 Rand grant that's about to run out. And of course, government has said that the money is tight, but that's been a lifeline for many. We'll see what the President has to say. That was Isabel Fryer from the Institute for Studies in Poverty and Inequality, and Owen Nkomo from Nkunzi Wealth.